Welcome class back to Chapter 2 Variables and Simple Data Types. This video is going to cover the second portion of Chapter 2. So we're looking at some data types and we're going to first look at numbers. So numbers fall into two separate categories. We have integers and we have floats. So integers are going to be our whole numbers. So a number that does not have a fraction or a decimal. And we can add, we can subtract, we can multiply, and we can divide. And we also can raise our integers to a power. So when we use to a power, we're going to use two asterisks to go ahead and raise that number to whatever power we're trying to raise it to. You can use spaces in your expressions or not. So you could say 5 space plus space 3, or you could leave this space out. I recommend using spaces for readability. Floats, they are numbers with decimal points, okay, or decimal point. Python will default to a float, okay, the result of our expression in any operation that uses a float, even if the output is a whole number. So if I say 10.0 times 2, okay, I'm going to get 20.0 as my answer because one of those numbers, one of those operands happens to be a float, and so it will default to having a decimal place. Okay, with division, what happens with division is that it will default to a float number even if both operands are an integer. Okay, so to use that, or to remove that decimal place, we can use the integer method, or we can code 2 forward slashes when we divide. So let's come into some practices, and we're going to look in our book, and we'll just practice some of these through the Python prompt. Okay, so if we say 3 plus 2, and again we can use spaces or not. Again, I recommend the spaces. We're going to go ahead and get our answer of 5. If I say 3.0, okay, plus 3, notice how I get the 6.0 because again one of my operands has a float involved in it. Now if I didn't want that, I could go ahead and say 3.0 plus 3 with integer method, and then it's going to remove that decimal place. When we're working with division, okay, so if I say 12 divided by 4, I'm going to get 3.0, and so to get rid of that decimal place, I could code 2 of them. Okay, and I get that, or I could say integer. I'm going to jump back a space here. I could say integer 12 divided by 4. Okay, and then I will have the removal of the decimal place. So again, just a reminder, when a float is involved in one of these expressions, it is going to return the float. If I want to remove it, I can use integer. In division, it doesn't matter if they're both whole numbers, okay, both integers, you're still going to get the float. So you'll either use the double forward slash for division or wrap the expression in integer. Now we'll look at some formatting. So we can use underscores in our numbers. So if we have something that's in the millions or the billions or even the thousandths or the hundred thousandths, we can go ahead and use underscores. So this is 14 billion. So it's much more readable with the underscores than it is over here counting the number of zeros. Python will use this number in the same way when it comes to its processing, whether the underscores are there or not. Multiple assignment, I can assign values to more than one variable using just a single line. So if X, Y, and Z need to be assigned initially, X is going to be 2 in this case, Y will be assigned 10, and Z will be assigned 35. So instead of 3 separate lines, we can condense it down to 1 line. Constants is a variable whose value stays the same. So we've heard the word constant. It means it doesn't change, right? So in programming, we note that by typing our constant in all uppercase. It's just really a visual in our program to say this is not a variable. This is a constant and that value should not change. Next, we'll look at comments, and I know I've mentioned comments for your assignments. Make sure that you have your name and date at the top of every lab that's assigned. And then in addition, I require 2 code requirements per lab, and those code comments can be just written notes, okay, written notes to yourself. Maybe they explain in your own words what the code is supposed to do, or maybe it's something you picked up on the book and you want to just add that into your file as a code comment. It could be a note to yourself of where you left off in coding. Okay, please make them meaningful. Okay, so that if someone else were to read your program, they would know exactly what maybe your code is actually trying to do in a logic format. Variables, so if we come back to the discussion of variables, variables can be self-commenting, meaning if I name my variable in a functional way, it can actually be a self-comment to the program itself. So again, if I name my variable var1, that's really not very meaningful, but if I name it full underscore name, I know that that's actually, the value should be a full name when that variable is assigned its content. And the last thing we look at in this chapter is the Zen of Python. If you are at the Python prompt and you type in import this, okay, you will get the Zen of Python by Tim Peters. And it's just really, what is Python about, okay? What are the simplicity and so forth, and what is special about Python. And this was written by Tim Peters. And so some of the ones that I always point out is readability counts. Okay, now is better than never. Let's see, there was simple, complex is better than complicated, and simple is better than complex. So these, again, we know what the word Zen means, okay? So it's what makes Python popular, makes Python special. And so this, again, is just pointed out by Tim Peters. So let's go ahead and look at our last assignment. Now, if you're in the second edition of the book, it's going to be labeled 2-8. If you're in the third edition of the book, it's going to be 2-9. Okay, so we have number 8. Now, what I want you to do is, I don't care about the number 8. I just want you to show me addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. They do not have to be the same numbers used for all 4. Okay, I just want those 4 operations shown to me, and the division should not be the output of a decimal place unless those 2 numbers would result in an actual decimal place. So if you have questions on this section or anything in chapter 2, please reach out. Thank you.